Been rifling through the bookcase and found a book that I read some years ago and really enjoyed, a sailing book. The Greatest Sailing Stories Ever Told is the name of it. It's edited by Christopher Caswell. Oh, I still got my hat on. Just come in out of the rain and had my old straw hat off, keep some of it off my head and glasses. Anyway, this is a good book. I really enjoyed it. It's made up of excerpts, I guess you'd call them, out of mostly sailing, but adventures too. Some are wild adventures, sailing, racing sailboats around the world and storms and all kinds of things. And well, it kind of strikes home for me because, you know, years ago I had the wooden ketch osprey, and I thought she was kind of invincible, really. Even in big seas, I had no fear of anything bad happening to her. But you know, Georgine and Scott and Tina and I took off sailing to Bermuda from the Chesapeake Bay. Got into some really bad weather. Not a hurricane, but a tropical depression. Big waves, big seas. And too much wind to sail in. And so I rolled up my sails, except for a little piece of a jib up there after reefing the jib. And now the Osprey had a huge wooden barn door rudder on her stern, and I was drifting backwards a little bit, and she was rolling with the waves on her bow. It was really dumb on my part. Worst thing you can do is let a boat drift backwards with a rudder sticking back there. So anyway, the rudder broke off. It was old, rods running through the planks on her to hold them in place, and I guess over the years, water seeping in at the seams of the planks allowed the bronze rods to corrode, and most of the rudder broke off. It had a rudder post, which was about, I don't know, 10 inches wide, 12 inches wide maybe, about 3 inches thick. But I was still able to steer her and control her, which says a lot for the shape of the hull and the sail plan, and the fact that I could sail her with just a tiny piece of rudder left and still control the boat. We could sail to windward and off the wind, and she did really well coming back home because we had to take her home, build a new rudder for her. After that, I had a little less confidence in my old boat, and it was a good thing because we went off another year, and 3 guys and myself, and so I was a little more careful about letting her run backwards downwind, because that's the way she wanted to set, bow into the wind. But I had a little less confidence. I was a little more careful, and it was a good thing. We made the trip fine, had a good time. But anyway, this story kind of reminds me of that. This fellow, Pete Goss, designed his own boat and had her built to race around the world. And he had some racing experience, and so anyway, I'm going to read the story. I may leave out some parts of it, but I'm going to basically read the story for us. Okay. This story of Pete Goss, an ex-Royal Marine, is one of sheer determination, incredible courage, and heroism of the highest caliber. Pete Goss was first drawn to the challenging long-distance ocean race at the age of 24, and his first Atlantic boat was weary when it arrived at the finish line in America. The keel fell off. Sacrificing everything, including his home and car, to build his boat, Aquaquarium, he set off on one of the most grueling races, the Vendée Globe, in non-stop, single-handed yacht race around the world. In this excerpt, close to the wind, Goss gives up his chances to win the race when he hears the faint mayday of a competitor. Deep in the raging Southern Ocean, far below Australia, in winds gusting near hurricane and seas as high as a 6-story building, he knows that the oldest tradition of the sea must be followed. When someone is in trouble, you help. And it's true here in Virginia on the Chesapeake Bay. The law commands that you go to help someone in trouble if you're out on the border. It won't give away anything to say that he saves the near-dead sailor from certain death in a life raft somewhere in the vast wilderness of the merciless seas. But it should prove satisfying that his action brought Goss France's highest award for gallantry. He was awarded the Legion of Honor. He was awarded the Medal of the British Empire by the Queen, and perhaps just as important, he was named Yachtsman of the Year by a public who viewed Pete Goss as a true hero. When he crossed the finish line in France, a crowd of 150,000 were on hand to cheer not the race winner, but its hero. So the man was a hero, and to any of us that have sweated out riding huge seas in any ocean, we know it. It takes courage to sail hard to windward in a storm. I whipped off the staysail and shoved it below, taking loads of water with it. So much of the stuff was sweeping the decks that it was hard to judge a good moment. I made the staysail halyard off on the storm jib, thinking that I had already hanked it on the readiness for an occasion. Christmas Day 1996 began with a bright blue sky and crisp, refreshing 20-knot wind from the north. My position was about 1,400 miles south of Perth, Western Australia. Perfect. I had been making good speed under the number two staysail, one reef of the main, as we surged along over a large northerly swell that had set in. It would have been idyllic if it had not been for the barometric pressure, which was dropping fast. A fall of 30 millibars in 24 hours, and most of that had been in the last 12. The forecast looked horrifying. The isobars on the weather chart were so close together that they seemed to merge into a single black line. I had settled, couldn't relax. I had seen livestock back in West Country bunched together, moving relentlessly along the field before a bad storm. My wife, Georgine, often says, "Look at the cows. They only lay down when there's bad weather coming." Lots of years of saying that has proven it to be true. I could relate to the feeling, except that it was my own. I had experienced many severe blows over the years, but this one, for some reason, held a heavy sense of foreboding. I could almost taste it in the air. Thoughts of Christmas were pushed to one side. I tried to ignore the feeling of uneasiness, but it followed me around the boat as I checked that everything was as it should be. Fear was not an emotion which I associated with the sea. Of course, I respected the ocean, but for me it was no longer an alien environment. It had become my way of life over the years, and I was comfortable in its presence. I knew that Aquaquarium and I were up to the job. It was the waiting for what was bound to be pretty grim conditions that brought on the whispers and anxieties. It was time to have a cuppa, get busy, apply logic. Once the storm arrived, the rest would be easy. I could feel it now. I togged up and got on deck. The wind started to back. Within 3 hours, it had gone around the southwest and was rising at an alarming rate. I could only just keep up. No sooner had I jibed and sorted everything out that the number two needed dropping. It was over the side and in the sea. Damn! It was a real struggle to drag it on deck as we hurtled along. I folded it up and left it lashed there. I knew it should have gone below, but I just didn't have time, and the wind was rising faster than I had ever experienced. I climbed back into the mast, put the third reef in, and still the wind rose. Hell's teeth, I reduced the sail area immediately. It was too much and needed reducing further. I could sense the autopilot struggling to cope as we hurtled along. No time to tidy the reefing lines. It flaked out the staysail halyard and fed the clutch. Couldn't afford niceties. The sail flogged, careened off down an odd sea, often submerged. It was hard work to manage the most basic of jobs, and elbow was playing up too. I whipped off the staysail and shoved it below, taking loads of water with it. So much of the stuff was sweeping the decks that it was hard to judge a good moment. I made the staysail halyard off on the storm jib. I had already hanked it on for readiness for the occasion, made my way back to the mast and tried to pull it up. It felt very hot beside my Musto oilies. I'd been hard at it for a couple of hours now. I went back in the cockpit for a breather to find that the wind was up to 40 knots and rising. Fuck me, I thought, and it was only just beginning. The hair stood on the back of my neck. I forgot about taking a breather. I had to get the main down and get it down quickly. Up to the mast. I flaked out the halyard, checked everything over. If it went wrong now, I knew the hell of a job getting it back under control. Not happy with the sheet, winched it in a bit and eased the halyard. The sail fell away, jammed on the spreaders and pinned by gusts of wind, God knows what strength. It was a real old struggle, and I had to work toward the gusts that was whipping the water into a frenzy. Made it off on the end of the boom and looked up. I then rigged up a couple of lines from the end of the boom to either side of the cockpit and winched them up bar tight. I worked my way around the boat, tidying everything away and making sure that all was shipshape. I pulled both dagger boards up and added a line to stop them from falling if one got rolled upside down. I tied off the blades on the wind generator, as the automatic brake didn't seem man enough for those conditions. I knew the number 2 sail should be removed from the deck and stowed below, but decided to leave it. The bow was underwater most of the time now, and discretion was the better part of valor in this case. I had to crawl on my hands and knees back to the cockpit. The wind was still rising, and I felt as though I was passing in a car, with the driver passing hard on the accelerator and no regard for rapidly approaching corner. I rolled from my knees onto the cockpit and clipped on my additional safety line before releasing the other. The wind was screaming, banshee, lashing the ocean into a frenzy of spume and spray that felt like a shotgun blast on my hands and face. It had settled at various 50 knots, topped up with regular gusts that blasted their way through the 6 to 60 knots, flattening the sea as they passed. Still, the storm hadn't settled. It continued to rise. I stumbled along for the first time in my life, fitted the washboards in anger. I shook off the worst of the water, grabbed a Mars bar, and once again called up the weather chart. There was nowhere to go. The best thing was to just run before it and hope the storm dissipated before inflicting too much damage. I looked at the chart. I suspect that Raphael Patrick might be experiencing even worse conditions, and I silently wished them well. We were all caught up in something far greater than we had ever experienced before. The energy of the storm was incredible. There were hurricane conditions. The hull hummed and shook as we surfed off down a wave 27 knots. I braced myself for the impact of the bottom, and we dropped for what seemed an eternity before the crash came. The wind on the rigging rose and fell from the high-pitched screech to a low, sorrowful moan that worked its way into my soul. I clambered back on deck and marveled at the conditions as we flew along under the storm jib balloon. The sail was little more than the size of a tablecloth, and yet the sheet was tight and unyielding as a steel rod. It resonated when I hit it with a winch handle. There was a roar as a big sea broke behind us. I ducked beneath the canopy and held on for grim death as good old aquaquarium accelerated out of it. This was fantastic. I grabbed the camera and fired off a few shots for the kids. I had never managed to take a good shot all my years at sea. The lens somehow flattened them out, but I suspect that these monsters might be impressive, and still the wind rose. The main concern was the waves. A large and menacing sea had whipped up from the southwest and was being made worse by a northerly swell that would take a while to dissipate. Individually, they represented nothing more than one would expect. It was wind that combined with erupted into an unpredictable brute of tumbling water. At times we were planing across the well, leaning to windward on the occasional steep face when northwesterly sea slammed into us. The transom was lifted by the combined force of the two waves, and we turned and dropped dangerously into a pit. I spent a while finding the best line, set the autopilot, and tumbled below. There was no steering out of the bad ones. It was better off shut below in the safety of the hull. I felt my control of the situation ebbing as the conditions deteriorated. Unusually, the first knockdown was to windward. Two waves erupted on my port quarter. Aquaquarium slewed around until she was dead downwind, and the keel on full power pulled her over. The wave did the rest as we accelerated into what felt like a brick wall. I was braced against the chart table, hands against the cabin roof, feet on the floor in a star position, and I watched through the skylight as the spreaders dragged in the water. They pulled her back to windward, and she was up, storming along. Jib filled, and she was off again. Water poured into the cockpit, cascaded below. I considered going to bare poles to slow the boat's headlong rush, but instinct told me that speed, alarming as it was the only defense I had. We hurtled into a hole at 45 degrees and dropped and stopped dead. I waited for the seemingly inevitable pitch pole. The cabin went dark as the sea cut out the light. I was thrown against the chart table and looked out of the back of the boat at the sky as gallons of water poured into the accommodation from the cockpit. The flare box hit me in the shin, and the pain gave me something to focus, dispel the fear as Aquaquarium struggled to recover. The rudders were out of the water, and I held on and hoped. There is always one bad blow on any long race, and you know that if you get through it, you will make the finish. I had no doubt that this was the one. There was a tremendous crash. Aquaquarium was knocked down again. I was thrown across the cabin as the boat groaned under the strain. Through the din, I heard the SATCOM system leaping away. I couldn't believe it was still able to work on what had practically become a yellow submarine. I struggled across the chart table and called up the message. Mayday, mayday, mayday. It was the distress call being passed on by Marine Rescue Control Center, MRCC, Australia. The vessel is in trouble was the yacht Algamos. Poor sod. I wondered who they were, and I hoped I wouldn't be joining them. Assumed that she was in somewhere near Australia coast. Extricated a chart from the mess, plotted their position, and did a double take. They were only 160 miles away. Who the hell would be daft enough to go down there? It never occurred to me that it might be one of us. The name Algamos meant nothing to me, as race committee communications had used the name of the skipper rather than the name of the boat. The SATCOM bleeped again. This time the message was from Philip. The Mayday was from one of us. Algamos was Raphael Danelli's boat, and he was in trouble. Philip asked if I could help. I took another look at the chart and realized that things were pretty bad. Not only was Raphael 160 miles away, but she was also to windward in atrocious conditions. But I had to go. I knew that. It was a simple decision had been made for me a long time ago by tradition of the sea. When someone is in trouble, you help. However, I needed a minute to grasp the enormity of it. How could we make headway in this weather? Would Aquacorum hold together? The reality of what lay ahead grabbed in my guts. It was a cold and clammy grasp. Having made the decision, I sat down to contemplate the consequences. It was only 30 seconds a minute, I'm not sure. I thought about what I was about to put on the line. My family, my boat, my life. In my own little world, it was a profound moment that I shall never forget. To me, and I am sure it was different for everyone. If you keep chipping away at your life, you will eventually get to a clear and simple crossroad. I know I had to stand up to my morals and principles. Turning back, whatever the stakes, would have been a disservice to myself, my family, and the spirit of the sea. I fired off a quick fax to Philip and expressed my doubts as to our ability to make our way back to Raphael, but I was going anyway. I ventured on deck and the fight began. I had to think of it as a fight. I shouted at the wind and the waves, and the anger helped to strengthen my resolve. We had to jibe. Oddly, it was easy and went like clockwork. I brought the Aquacorum up to face the wind, feeling the full force of the hurricane as the wind crossed the deck, immediately increased by 25 knots speed that I had been traveling downwind. The first gust put the guardrail under and the lower spreaders touched the water. I couldn't believe the energy that was whistling past. Winched into storm jib hard, but the helm down again and waited to see what happened. Aquacorum was game. It was as if she knew what was at stake. The mast slowly came upright. She began to move at 8 knots, sometimes more. As she climbed steeply to windward, toppling gusts at the apex of each huge wave before accelerating down the 50-foot slope at the other side into the next trough. It wasn't quite the course I needed. 80 degrees to wind was the best we could do, but it was a start. The wind would ease off soon. It had to. Meanwhile, it screamed definitely through the rigging, sounding like a jet taking off as Aquacorum gamely struggled away. Job done. I went below and stowed the sailmaker kit, put a quick cup of tea on, and vroom. It was Royal Administration Air Force rescue plane. They told me over the VHF that they had dropped Raphael 2 life rafts. He seemed well and was on an immersion suit. His yacht, Algamos, was submerged. I took her position and asked if there was any other vessels involved in the rescue. No, sir. We're pitting our hopes on you, come the reply. Fine, we'll do it. Round 2 began as the aircraft engines faded into the distance. I spent a quiet few minutes working out my next actions as Aquacorum continued to bash her way to windward. I needed a new strategy because the fight had changed. The more I thought was required, the now an existent determination was not enough. I broke the way ahead into clearly defined chunks and mentally walked this course a few times. I felt as though I was actually there, each time growing in a new problem and coming up with practical solutions. Every visualized run culminated in a successful rescue. Okay, I think I'll leave the rest to you to read this story yourself. The book's available online, I think, and I've really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed reading this little piece too, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. It's really something, the guts of a man, when he feels he has to do a thing, regardless of the danger to himself. Yeah, okay, well, I'm going to quit on this because I don't want to tell the whole story, give the thing away to you. But I'll bet you will enjoy it when you read it. Bye-bye.